speaker from the affirmative side to begin the case for the affirmative. Yeah.
What's the motion being debated in this room?
The motion is the co-determination one.
The second one, right?
Yeah, right.
Would it be possible for the speakers to open their cameras during their speech if they're comfortable with it?
Okay. I'm just getting my timer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Hello, can I clearly be heard?
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you. Okay. I'll be discussing 3 things in this speech. First is to answer the principal question, why do the workers have a claim to the right to vote for a representative in the board of directors? Secondly, why do we prefer co-determination and co-partnership versus other alternatives like unions having more leverage and being able to represent the workers? But lastly, I will create preemptions and we will deal with the worst case of maybe investors will pull out because you now have workers in the BOD and say that that's unlikely to happen. And even then we say that we think it's an okay thing given the trade-offs. Let's go to the first thing. Before we discuss the principal claim, we will talk about the model. So for our model coming from AF, one is right now in status quo, we do not have representatives for the within the board of directors, we only have unions. So we would rather that we allow the workers to be able to vote for representatives in the board of directors in the company. Secondly, in terms of the selection of these representatives, so these people within their own unions are going to have like campaigns, they're going to have platforms, and people can vet these platforms and vote for that person whom they think can represent them the most. And these things will be facilitated by the union leaders, will be facilitated by the people within the company, even if they're not part of the union. The last is, we think in terms of the board of directors, the percentage will be around 1/5 of the board of directors will be the representatives of the workers. And if you are part of the board of directors, it just basically means that you have a stake in terms of voting policies, in terms of being able to veto certain things, to be able to air out your ideals. I think regardless of the marginal change that will happen on either side, the process of being able to hear the qualms of these people, the process of participation is already a value in itself. Whatever happens, regardless of whether or not we create structural change, and we think it's likely, it's just merely like a big bonus, and we just generally feel like them being able to be heard because they are now in the room where it happens. They now have a seat on the table is something that's great. So let's talk about the principal claim. 1, why do the workers have a claim to the rights to vote for a representative in the board of directors? To be able to explain this principal claim, I'll try to make it very clear. I'll first discuss what are the standards to be part of the board of directors first, and then tell you how workers fulfill those standards and therefore they have the right to vote for a representative. So what are the standards to be part of the board of directors? I will liken this to how you have investors and venture capitalists who invest in your company. Why do they have the right to be there? There are 3 things. 1 is because they partake in the risk. 2, because they are integral to company functioning. And 3, because of the long-term sustainability of the company, and they are extremely needed in that instance. So how do workers fulfill those things? 1, let's talk about partaking in risk. Investors, whenever they are part of the board of directors, partake in the risk because they will lose their capital, the point at which the company falls and becomes bankrupt. How does it happen for workers too? We believe that workers, I think, equally experience the same participation and the partaking of risk, given that the point at which the company goes bankrupt, they also lose out on salary. They lose out on benefits. They lose out on the ability to put food on the table, given that they're the breadwinner of the family. These things are ones that you partake in the risk of. And therefore, given that, we think the time you invest, the effort you invest, and also your source of income is equally the same as that of an investor and the risk that he or she takes, We therefore believe that you partake in the risk, and thus you have to have a seat in the table. The second thing is, it's integral to company functioning. So you need investors because they need capital, and capital is integral to the company functioning. That's why they have a seat on the table. Why do we think it's the same thing for workers? Without workers, literally your company will never exist, because the biggest manpower or the biggest expense actually in any company is the workers, precisely because they are the most integral ones that you have to be able to have, because they give their time, their labor, their experience, their background. They invest all of that in you as a company. So therefore, we think generally and also intuitively, right? Like a company can never exist without its workers. That's the reason why we liken it to the investors. We liken it to the capital that these investors put in the company. And therefore, again, they have to have a seat on the table. The last thing is, in terms of long-term sustainability. So the investors make sure that they create strategic plans because they're in the board of directors. That's what board of directors do. They create long-term strategies. They create a big picture for the company, etc., etc. So we think that it is the same thing with workers. Why? Because one, they have the incentive to make sure that the company continues. Given that, they will. That's the work that they're like putting their life's work into it, right? Their efforts. They go to that office every day. They invest in the people there. Invest in the culture there. So we think that's one. But secondly, in terms of the ability of like creating the issue visibility, right? So we think this is extremely important. If these investors are the ones that we rely on when it comes to creating strategies for the company, we think it's best if you have the workers to air out their thoughts directly to these people, because they have a seat on the table. Like they can literally listen to, these are our qualms with that proposal. We think people will strike if you do this or that thing. So therefore the impact is, one, you have better decision making on our side that considers the workforce even more. But secondly, it's the general feeling of being heard, that you are unlikely to go on strikes and to go on protests. So therefore it's good for the company also, because you feel legitimate, you feel like you're legitimately being listened to. And we think this is great. So now, the second argument is, why do we think this is better as opposed to other alternatives like unions? We say, one, unions aren't enough. There are multiple problems with unions. There are problems of union busting. There are problems of higher ups in the company buying out the leaders of unions to make sure that you don't have leaders in the unions anymore. There's a collective action problem in unions where people feel like they can't cooperate because of the demands of the unions, because you have to pay fees, exorbitant fees, you have to join rallies, etc. We therefore think that unions aren't enough, and it's extremely unrepresentative also a lot of times because you only listen to the higher ups. At least here, it's more democratic because you vote for it as the entire company. But the second problem with the other alternative is in terms of complaints, right, and bureaucracy. It's so difficult for these workers to talk to their HR manager and say that I'm going through this problem because of the red tape in company, the bureaucracy, and how these HR officers can literally just say, sorry, we don't have budget for that. I think the better comparative is on our side. The exclusive thing is, again, you're in the room where it happens. You directly talk to these people, and it is guaranteed that they will listen to you because you're literally sitting one like 1 meter apart, right? You're in the same board of directors, as opposed to you having to have a mediator, which is the HR officer, which is speculative that they will tell their higher ups that this is a problem, given that the company already has so many problems. So the last thing I'll talk about is this: preemptions. Opposition might say that the board of directors is a group where they talk about long-term planning and specialized knowledge, so these workers probably don't have the knowledge for it, right? We say, as a response, one, you don't need any training anymore because the knowledge and skills you already have as a worker is already very, very valuable because you're already part of the company. This is the reason why companies would rather retain workers as opposed to hire new workers, because it's so expensive to train new workers, right? So if their problem is in terms of specialized knowledge, or you don't have the ability to talk to these higher ups, I think one, that's quite elitist to say those things. We think these people have a valid claim to this, and their voices are also valid in that they're part of the company, they are affected by it, they have a right to be at the table. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the first speaker from the negative side to open the case for the negative. Here.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Can you hear me? Can
Yeah, sure we can.
Set up my camera somewhere where I can be seen. Give me a second. Let me just set up my timer. Side proposition lost this debate from the onset because their benefits are not only unique to their side of the house. What do we mean by this? First, they tell you about how through the process of these workers voicing their opinions out, this will really help the company learn more about these workers. In the status quo, with a union system, workers can already voice their opinions through the union themselves. This is not something that's only unique to their side of the house. Secondly, they tell you about how on their side of the house, these workers will have like a seat on the table to discuss. This is not the case. All these workers do is they vote in a person, and this person will discuss within the board of directors. These voters will not actually have a seat on the table to discuss themselves. So these people can easily just like ignore what their campaign promises and just do whatever they want other than on the board of directors. And furthermore, maybe these people don't interpret the messages of the workers as well as the workers did. So this is very much different from the workers actually being on the table themselves. And arguably, this is the same as on our side of the house. Why? Because on our side of the house, if we want to make an impact, we can go on strike, and we can propose different members. So really, these workers don't have a seat at the table like they said on the side of the house. But let's rebut. But even though they kind of lost this debate from the strategic planning on the first place, I'm going to be generous and engage with their case either way. So 2 points of rebuttals here. Firstly, on the idea about how these workers have the right to be here, there are 2 analyses on this. Firstly, they tell you about if these workers actually partake in the risk, they have the right to be there. We completely disagree with this. First of all, if everyone who has a right, who has a risk in something, has the right to participate in the decision-making process, then let's say, for example, I'm China, and I'm like North Korea, and I'm a country, and I'm dependent on another country. And if I were to that country were to fail, then I would lose all my investment in that country, and therefore I have the right to intervene in that country's internal affairs. This is obviously not a strong enough reason to say that workers have the right to be there. Secondly, I think the workers are integral to the functioning of the company. Well, we argue that the actual truth is that workers are actually much more replaceable than stakeholders are. As in, you can find a level of worker to put them in place. On the other hand, stakeholders are people who are hard to convince to actually invest in you. So workers are much more replaceable than stakeholders. Now, second, on the idea about how unions have certain flaws, we agree. However, these flaws can be reformed through policy. For example, we can hold unions more accountable. We can add in new policies in our government to make unions more powerful. They have to prove to us why all of these methods reform will fail, and therefore unions need to be completely abolished and use this extreme policy. So they have not proven to us those problems where reform will not work. Secondly, tell us about how we have no okay. And I think that's enough in that case, actually. Now on to our side of the house. We want to first tell you that actually workers' benefits are contingent on a company's benefits. Why? Firstly, the wealthier a company is, the more money they have to invest in the workers' benefits. For example, their paternity leave, they give them money for retirement and so forth. So the more wealthy a company is, the more a company is able to invest in these workers. The truth is that companies, when just starting, they're very profit incentivized. They want to make money. So on the beginning part of a company's lifespan, it usually just cares about making money. So only when a company is able to get into the wealthier part of its lifespan, then this company will be able to actually invest in workers' rights more. So really, workers need to be able to get companies to be wealthier for them to actually get the benefits that they want on their side of the house. Also, if the company was to go bankrupt, then these workers will very much lose their employment, which is very hard to find in our competitive market nowadays. So you can see the workers' benefit are very much contingent on the company's benefit way to do well. So as long as we can prove that the company's benefit will be greatly harmed in this debate, we can prove that we are satisfied for workers overall. Our policy is simple. It will still have union. We will have union reform, which will use unions function better. Okay, now on to our substantive. Firstly, we want two substances in today's debate. Firstly, how workers will make the best decision. Secondly, about how our side would be more meritocratic. And lastly, on about how this is better for company, which our second speaker will go into today's debate. Firstly, about how on our side of the house, and workers will not make the best decision for the company. You have to agree that companies survive on profit. If they lose profit, they lose profit, they lose stakeholders, investors who invest in them. And secondly, they will also lose the capital they need to invest in other industry to compete with other companies in today's very competitive market. But the problem is that so they really need profit. But the problem is that workers are not as good to implement policies, advocate for policies that are profit incentivized as compared to normal board of directors members. Why? First of all, normal board of director members first of all, there are two reasons. They're more responsible to their stakeholders, therefore they need to actually get profit. And secondly, people who are in the board of directors are generally trained to get profit. On the other hand, workers, they have a higher responsibility to themselves and their family. Therefore, they're more incentivized to advocate for policies that for example, give them more retirement benefits, or give them longer paternity leaves. Therefore, workers' mindset is not skewed towards making profit for the company. So therefore, when you get voters to actually advocate for policies and be the sole decider in who gets voted into the company, they're likely to have advocate for policies that really harms the company's profit. So they may tell you that's at the house, okay, maybe a bit of the profit will get harmed. This doesn't hurt them. Actually, it does hurt. Why? Today's market is very competitive. If you fail to invest in a project in the right time, or if you fail to grab an opportunity, then you can easily get kicked out of the market completely. And therefore, it's very important for the company's performance to be at its optimum all the time, for it to make sure it can compete and still a fair life in today's market. So what happens on their side of the house is that these workers will be incentivized to vote in people who best benefits their own benefits, like for example, employment benefits and so forth. And the board of directors, because they want that power, status, and money, they're likely to listen to, they're likely to try to galvanize and listen to these workers, and when they do so, they will implement policies that are not actually right or correct and would harm the company overall. So they may tell you on that side of the house that these board of directors will still make logical decisions. We disagree, because sometimes even if you kind of like temporarily take a position on the board of directors, it still very much benefit you. For first of all, is that you get power and status and money. That's very attractive. But second of all, the truth is that when you come on a board of directors, it can be a kind of like a kind of a platform where you get into better positions. For example, if you're on the board of directors of a very powerful company, you can use that kind of status and power to get political positions, or to get into another company. Therefore, even a short-term election, like even if the company were to fail, the temporary benefit of being on the board of directors is enough for these people to want to listen to these workers, even if the workers' policies is actually accurate, it actually harms the company overall. And obviously, the harm of it is that the company will stagnate, and this will harm the workers themselves, like I've proven to you in my characterization already. So, and lastly, I'll just lay the foundation for our second substantive about how it's hard to be meritocratic. Actually, no, okay, I'll leave it to my second speaker because I'm running out. Okay, so on our side of the house, because we are on the side that better make sure that companies actually make the right decision to actually make their profit and help these workers. We decided to win today's debate, and we're so proud to oppose. Thank you. Oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the second speaker from the affirmative side to continue their case.
Hello, testing my microphone. Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So companies and workers don't always have to have diametrically opposing interests. They can actually agree on a lot of things. They can agree on what type of wage you can need to have. They can agree on what type of work environment you should have. And this only proves that a lot of the current structure now is not conducive for them to see eye to eye. What we are proving from affirmative side is that we provide a roadmap to success, providing a negotiating table for both of them to see eye to eye on the same issues and be able to, as much as possible, compromise. I have a few points of argumentation in this speech. Number one, how we moderate the pernicious behavior of companies, and secondly, how we moderate the sometimes abusive behavior of labor unions themselves. Before this, a few points of rebuttal. I have 4 rebuttals. The first thing is to the comparative. So the first speaker of negative introduced the comparative that we still have unions. Unions can still protest. We can reform unions and make them more inclusive, and therefore that's effective. This is unresponsive against a lot of the comparisons that we gave from first speaker, such as that unions are ineffective now if they're outside of a board of director position for many reasons. 1, because companies have the incentive to union bust. 2, because companies constantly try as much as possible to buy out union membership to weaken their collective action. And 3, because of cooperation internally within the union because of political divisions. So yeah, some of these divisions still exist in our side, but they are better consolidated and better aggregated in a board of director position because they have direct say and direct vote. Whereas you have more middlemen with unions because those are more likely to be politicized, those are more likely to have internal divisions and more likely to be more scrutinized against individuals inside of it. Second rebuttal, I want to now address the response to our principle because I think they misunderstood our principle. The response they gave was that about dependency, that it's different because if a country is dependent on another, that country who has a higher power, higher leverage, should have the leverage and should have the say in being able to dictate what happens in other nation. This is not true. Our principle is not only about dependency. We said that to the extent workers are dependent on a corporation, corporations and employers and a lot of these board of directors are so much dependent on these workers and the environment they are created in and how their productivity and how their efficiency is created, how they are honed. That is why it is an assessment of risk. To the extent an investor invests in a company, puts in capital, puts in owner's capital and puts in funds, and that risk is going to go up and down whether a company succeeds or not. People also do that too. Workers also invest their time. Workers also invest their opportunities. Workers invest their health. They risk so much of their lives in being able to do it. And that's why they have a principled claim to the shares of a company, to the ability to vote for representatives of a company, especially if it directly infringes on their ability to also do it. So that's why it's important. But the third rebuttal I have is that I want to contest this idea that they said that, oh, no, you're going to harm the profit of a company. We would rather prefer the idea of making money early on and then they can help the workers later on when the later lifestyle of a company. This isn't true for many reasons. The first reason is that it doesn't always have to be that way. You can also uplift your workers by creating a productive, conducive environment that is also good for them, even if you give them pensions, even if you give them good healthcare. That's why many countries now, like just an intuition pop, even if they have universal healthcare, are also definitely capable of being able to subsidize the profits of their company or being able to subsidize their operations. But secondly, workers won't buy in to a company if they believe that they'll have to wait 10 or 15 years for them to get the pension that you are waiting for. That is why you create the cooperation problem now. That is why they protest. That is why they are more violent. That is why they always disagree. That is why they always lead to even worse outcomes for companies because of the volatility caused by labor unions. And yeah, strikes do indeed lessen productivity, but we lessen those strikes to the extent at least workers can now buy in because they can vote on something that directly infringes on them or not infringe on them. Like simple things, right? Like if I want to choose which CEO seems that he's more likely to cater to my interests, if I trust the CEO, then I'm more likely to cooperate and I'm more likely to go and be happy when I work, as opposed to their side. If that CEO was elected by some people in an amorphous, board of directors table, I will not trust that CEO. I am more likely to be antagonistic. I am more likely to protest. That's a simple idea. But the last thing I want to ask is, can workers make good decisions? So I want to debunk the misconception that this debate is only about having sole deciders. We are not having a sole decider of the worker. What we are doing is that it's not about who has a better perspective. It's about how we can reconcile these perspectives as much as possible. And we said there are many ways to do that. It's not just about board of directors profit and workers always pension. It cannot always be like that because workers also care about profit too, to the extent it also cares about their self-interest. In the same way, like an investor wants to care about their long-term career viability and their investment and how much money they earn from a company by also thinking about profit. So profit is just a means to understand their interests. We can better allocate that and aggregate that in our model, especially if these interests can also not be diametrically opposed. So that's what I want to prove right now. First argument, how can we moderate the pernicious behavior of corporations? So status quo. The status quo right now is problematic because companies have an incentive to crack down on their employees and see them as different liabilities for a company. This is the perspective even given by the previous speaker. You see them as liabilities because they're, welfare dumps. They always are lazy people that always want to ask for more wages. They're people that are not willing to work for a company. That is why you see the current on cooperation in many companies in the United States, for example. That's why they have incentives now to accelerate automation. They have incentives now to not invest in training because they're afraid that you're probably going to leave and just go to another company, or that they'll think that they're going to conduct union busting activities so that they can conduct fear mongering activities towards you. That is why currently they invest a lot in union consulting services so that they can scare off a lot of the employees that are likely to side with unions. That is why there's so much so much toxicity within many companies in the employer-employee relationship. We moderate this behavior even just a little bit or even significantly marginally by simply saying that this voting mechanism, having an election, aggregates these interests even better. Like, I think the simple mechanism of having people be on the same table, discussing it and taking their time away for 1 hour or 2 hours of their time, even if they might get a bit frustrated, even if they might hate each other a little bit, they're more likely to reconcile because all of them care about profit together. All of them care about the company surviving. Like, it's sometimes difficult, but it is much better than the alternative where they never talk at all, but they're likely to stop all discussions preemptively because corporations think they have a lot of interest and a lot more say and a lot of leverage over them. We moderate the pernicious behavior, the worst type of behavior that are likely to cause a lot of people to have a lot of job insecurity and a lot of unemployment. The second argument is why this moderates the behavior of labor unions. So actually, labor unions are actually sometimes pernicious too. They sometimes have to respond to middle management, and they're very frustrated with a lot of middle managers because sometimes they have their own career interests, they don't care about what unions think, and sometimes they don't agree with the elections or even their union representatives are. That's why they sometimes get aggressive for many reasons. One, they prioritize insiders as opposed to outsiders so that they don't care about the welfare of all workers in a company. Two, because they create a toxic environment for those who don't participate in unions, that don't share in the strikes. Or three, because they only seek to antagonize the employer. These are all reasons to believe that they create a very, very bad, inconducive working environment for cooperation and productivity. And that is why people feel afraid. That is why people don't even want to join unions now. We create a better roadmap. We create a better mechanism that allows people to cooperate better and allow people to align their interests, even if sometimes they don't agree on all things. I'm very proud of those.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the second speaker from the negative to continue the case.
Can I'll leave my video off since my Wi-Fi is a bit bad right now. Give me a sec. I'll get my timer. Okay, I'll be. Oh, I'm audible, right? So I'll be starting in 3, 2.
Wait, hello,
1.
sorry. Our teammate disconnected. Is it alright if we give some time?
Okay, I'll just wait a bit.
Oh, is she here? Julia, are you here?
I'm back. I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, is it fine now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, to start off, I would like to point out three clear mistakes in their policies that stop any of the benefits that they're trying to propose from happening in the first place. First problem is the representation of workers. We simply believe that 1/5 of the workers being 1/5 of the board of directors is something that is inherently too small for them to make a difference. Being 20% of a committee in no way ensures that they're heard and that they can make actual meaningful changes when they were to be elected into the committee as one of the boards of directors. The second problem with the policy is another assumption that they can vote in progressive representatives. On our side, we believe that the candidates that would be voted in are those who have more money and influence in the company. This is due to two reasons. Firstly, the richer and more influential people in the company would inherently have more funds to run campaigns so they can get elected in the first place. And the interest of these people would be more driven towards would be more driven towards the elites of the company. And I will elaborate on why this is bad later on in my speech. And secondly, they're also assuming that when voted in, the representatives can make a difference. I've already mentioned this on how 1/5 is something that is inherently very small for them to make a difference. And secondly, I would like to point out a contradiction in the case that has been brought up by said second speaker. The second speaker went on and on about how there is a toxic climate between employers and employees, on how they have on how they both have very conflicting interests. As for instance, employers must unions. They ensure in every way, every single point possible, that unions do not work so that the workers do not gain benefits such as workers' rights, such as higher wages that would damage the profits of their companies. However, they are expecting the employers themselves to the employees and employers to cooperate in this toxic climate. We believe that this is simply impossible given the characterization that the second speaker is trying to push, and therefore any meaningful cooperation that they're trying to propose cannot happen on their side. And all of the benefits of having a progressive candidate to represent the workers simply fails, as the employer and the employees either cannot work together because of the toxic climate that he mentioned, or they simply have too little representation to enforce any meaningful change. So now, to move on, to move on to a few key points of rebuttals. Firstly, he questioned us on our rebuttal to their first point on why workers do not deserve representation. We on our side, we believe that firstly, workers do deserve representation, and this is done through unions. We believe unions are a much better organization to provide the interest to further the interest of these workers, due to many structural reasons, such as they can organize strikes, which are much more meaningful than this very small minority that workers can have in the board of directors. And on their second point on how unions are inherently bad, they are providing us a very uncharitable description of unions. We believe that firstly, unions are very strong, they are very tribalistic, and therefore they would do anything in order to provide for their workers, as their legitimacy stems from them being elected by the workers themselves. This is why union being bought out by companies are very unrealistic. And even in the case that union being bought out is unrealistic, what's to stop the people being voted into the board of directors being bought out themselves? The characterization that they have brought up is another conflict in their case, that there are the elites in the workers, or the elites and the leaders of the workers are willing to compromise with the corporations. We believe that this is another fatal flaw in the case, showing why the cooperation in this model is simply impossible. On our first point, their sole rebuttal to our first point was, workers aren't the only one making decisions, and workers and corporations have some shared interest in making profit for the company. We believe that this is simply untrue. Profit and workers' right and workers' pension are inherently two very contrasting things. You can't make more money if you're literally paying more money to your workers. You can't get more profits if you're imposing restrictions to ensure your workers have a safer environment. And this is why we believe that our first point still stands in this debate. And so now I would like to cover some of the material that has been brought up by my first speaker. Firstly, I would like to provide the second point on how it is harder to be meritocratic, and my last point will be how it is better for the companies themselves. So on the first point on how it is harder to be meritocratic, in the status quo, we believe that people want company to do well, and this is why the board of directors elect good hardworking people into the board of directors. The board of directors are able to see who are competent workers and put their a much provides some rational to be chosen and would still want to make it. So what does this mean?
Yum, I think your internet has a problem. We can't hear you.
Actually, not really.
What about now?
So you're in and out. Ideally, can you like move closer to your Wi-Fi router or something and then perhaps rewind for the past 20 seconds?
He texted that he was kicked out of Zoom.
Right.
He will rejoin soon.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, what part was I at? Can you hear me now?
You
Yeah, you
kind
were
of
just
just
inaudible
started
for the
the
past
second
15
sub.
seconds.
Also, I was just starting my point, and you guys couldn't hear me.
Yes, I think that was.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll say my point again. I stopped at 5:05:56 on my timer. That was when I was notified, so I'll continue from there. So on our point, we believe that well, we would be able to provide a much more meritocratic framework for the board of director members to be chosen. In the status quo, we believe that people who are in the board of director gets to choose the next people who were to take the positions in the board of directors. This means that they would be more likely to choose people who are competent at their work and people who are devoted to the company. Yes, there will be some bias. They are not entirely rational beings. However, on a comparative, our side at least provides a rational framework by which candidates can be chosen. So what's the impact of this compared to the other side? On the other side, we believe that lots of established, already rich candidates have a huge advantage in terms of company connections, political capital, and wealth. Therefore, it is very much easier to campaign and attract voters. So these are the people who would inevitably be voted in the board of directors, and we believe that this is something that is inexcusable. However, on our side, in the status quo, people get board of director positions not based on their wealth, not based on their political connections, but based on meritocracy. Our side makes it easier for people who work hard, who wants to climb the ranks, to actually be integrated into the board of directors. Therefore, we also make it easier for minorities and non-establishment workers to move up the ranks. People who do not necessarily fit into the social atmosphere of the board of social atmosphere of the company, but are still competent, will still be voted into the company. And we believe that side opposition might say people would vote for minorities because they want representation. This is simply not true because in the other side, minority candidates simply cannot get their word out, so people would not know about them. And the impact of this is twofold. Firstly, our side provides a much better framework for representation of minorities, as they at least get a chance to be to be a part of the board of directors. And secondly, secondly, we also believe that we provide a framework by which competent people can be chosen to lead the board. And my third point on how it is better for companies, we believe that due to the democratic structure, people would be more short-termist to get re-elected. For this reason, policies would be focused on not on long-term things like education, but on short-term things like immediate increases in salary. Well, we also believe that having a board of directors also undermine unions, as they would bleed out due to not receiving enough members and losing their legitimacy. And for these reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the third speaker from the affirmative side to close the case, the affirmative.
Hello, can I be heard? Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh wait, I'll turn on my video, I guess. Hello. Even if you believe the best case of negative bench at this point in the debate, you can only believe that unions might be a viable alternative, but they do not prove the quote-unquote massive harm that exists by including people in the board of directors. I'm going to prove to you why, one, these alternatives just simply don't work, but more importantly, there is an outweighing benefit and disprove all of the quote-unquote like harms that exist, the point at which you put workers in the board of directors. Before I move on to that, a few extraneous rebuttals. Basically, what the second speaker was trying to do was trying to prove that our mechanism just does not work at representing individuals. Their first response to this is just this isn't enough people to gain things like a majority. I think you need to take a look in the composition of a board of directors. So it's not as massive as things like Parliament or Congress. A lot of the times it exists as like a few dozen people at a time. So a lot of the times it's not all that small. So more importantly, right? 20% is very important in gaining majorities on other split issues, for example, that exist within a board of directors. So it's also important that you pander to the 20% such that whoever is making a proposal that is split at this point in time can gain the majority at that point in time. Also notice that a lot of the conclusions coming from like my team members are not on the basis of you need an all-out win, for example, in order to only get the benefit for the worker. We told you that there was a benefit in itself to even bringing up issues about the worker that were previously not considered, even being listened to in the first place and being considered when you make policy, even if it is not the quote-unquote best and most radical form of the policy, at the very least gets a benefit in that point. But I'd also like to take a look at the converse. Even if their union was completely functional, it's unclear to me why the union therefore has the capacity to outweigh or at least be equal, for example, in the decisions of the board of directors. And this already assumes a completely functional union that always agrees on whatever points they have to put out. It's unclear whether union decisions can suddenly, for example, outweigh a lot of the abusive decisions that come from the board of directors. The second level by which they respond to this is that, oh, only rich people are going to be the ones that are elected to the board of directors. I think they forget the voter incentive that exists between like workers, especially workers on the ground. A lot of the times, if it is your interest to be represented, you are also likely to, for example, vote for a member that is part of your demographic group, vote for a member who is genuinely representing you. And I would also posit it's not necessarily bad that the privileged people are the ones who are representing these individuals, because these privileged people understand in order to get on the board of directors, they need to pander to these people. They need to pander and cater to their interests. So they are also likely, for example, to have a platform that includes minority workers. They are likely, for example, to have a platform that includes the other disenfranchised members of their workforce. Also because a lot of the times they have quite a large voting bloc, especially, for example, in blue-collar level workers. So I would argue that this harm isn't really real. It ignores voter incentives, ignores how a lot of elections work and how you actually win and become part of the board of directors. I'm going to be discussing two things in my speech. Do these workers have the right to be represented? And second, on a pragmatic evaluation of outcomes. First, do these workers have the right to be represented? So I think we've made it very clear from the very first speaker that there are standards for what puts you in the board of directors in the first place. You partake in risk. You're integral to the functioning of the corporation. You're important for the sustainability and the long-term functioning of the corporation as well. Even if you do not believe these three standards, all policies made by the board of directors directly affect the lives of these workers, their wage, whether departments will be dissolved, whether they will be let go, the job security that they have. And we would ought to say, even if you do not believe those three standards, you ought to have a say in these decisions that directly affect your quality of life at the end of the day. What is their response to these three standards that we provide to you? Their response is like, risk is not a standard for meddling. And then they use an analogy that doesn't work. The difference between interstate relations and interstate meddling is that it breaches the sovereignty of another people. It is not at all parallel, for example, to the mechanizations that exist in one single corporation. I don't think you can credit that as a real parallelization at all. But I'm going to tackle the idea of, so what does that prove? I think it proves that the standards and the principle justification are just not responded to at this point in time. But now let's talk about tackling alternatives. Their ideas of union reform. So first of all, this concedes that unions at this point in time are not very effective. So the thing is, when they say that, oh, we can have union reform, they don't tell us how this reform actually looks like. How does it tackle corporations corrupting unions by leading and giving a lot of money to pro-corporation union leaders? Crackdowns. How does it even stop the structural reason that joining a union in the first place costs money, and a lot of the times it's hard for an employee to take out that money from his pocket that he needs, for example, for the day? How does it change things like middle managers not taking up your concerns to the higher ups, no matter how powerful and how united your union is? What does this mean? The alternative of affirmative bench, at the very least, is that it fixes a lot of these things that would have prevented individuals from having a structural and functioning union. First, it is free to vote. You are obligated to vote. You are likely, for example, really not obligated, but you have the capacity to in every sense, and you don't necessarily aren't barred by a lot of these other structural reasons that we were talking about here. They don't tell you how these unions fix these individual problems, so you'd have to believe that this is still going to happen on their side. But on a pragmatic evaluation, right? So the main claim of negative bench in regards to pragmatic benefit is that you have far less efficient corporations, which is also bad for the worker because they don't get, obviously a bad corporation cannot pay you. So I think there are multiple levels of response to this. The first is, Luigi, my second speaker, gave you multiple roadmaps to efficiency. Notice that it is not just paying your workers the bare minimum that gives you efficiency. It also looks like keeping your workers happy such that they work very well, such that they have good interrelations with their other workers and therefore can be as effective as they can be. But a second level response to this is we actually fix the rift between the interests of an employee and an employer. Understand what I told you a while ago about voting in the board of directors. The point at which you intertwine the interests of the employee and the employer, you have both parties forced to pander to the other side such that you can gain a majority in the board of directors. This is the mechanism by which you actually fix the rift between these two and actually see the sides of actually see the perspective of the other side. The third, and this also came from Luigi, by the way, the third level of response here is that even if it might be true that you make it a little less efficient, they need to recognize the extent by which it becomes less efficient. So obviously, I don't think it will go to the extent that they will become uncompetitive and go bankrupt. Because if it is true that employees benefit from a relatively efficient corporation, then obviously employees and their representatives are going to vote accordingly and are not going to drive these corporations to bankruptcy because they understand that this is also a benefit to them. So I think the marginal difference is you are a little less efficient, but it's not as to the extreme that the previous speaker that anyone from negative bench talks about. So you might not be 100% efficient. You might be 85% efficient. But if that 15% comes at the cost of giving better healthcare, better wages, better livelihoods for people on the ground such that they can feed their families, we think we're willing to sacrifice the 15% at this point in time. The 15% doesn't make you uncompetitive, but it sure gives a hell of an impact to the people on the ground. Thirdly, on the idea of that we're going to bump out other potential candidates who are much better at their jobs in the board of directors. Notice that board of directors, unlike any other democracies or election series in parliament, does not have a set number of seats. You can expand these things. So if, for example, they want more individuals or they feel like another individual is also capable, you can have those people at the end of the day. What does this mean and what does this pragmatic evaluation essentially say? It doesn't matter. We disprove the idea that you are that inefficient as they say, but even if you are slightly less efficient, it comes at the cost of giving better lives for people on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech. I now call upon the third speaker from the negative side to end the case for the negative.
Am I audible? It might be a bit loud where I am.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Okay, I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1 now. I think that side affirmative really lost this debate when they tried to chew off more than they could actually bite, right? Let's try to look at two strategic mistakes on side affirmative before I get into the key clashes of this debate. Firstly, on their model, right? Their model was basically, we give 1/5% of representatives on the board. Therefore, this will be enough to get the type of progressive changes that they are looking at. Firstly, Zuma's already told you why this doesn't work because this is just a very small minority. It doesn't really do anything. But secondly, I'm going to give you more reasons about what is likely going to happen. First, what's likely going to happen is that, one, their voices are going to be drowned out by the vast majority of conservative representatives that are already in the board of directors, because these conservative candidates, these conservative representatives have their own personal benefits, have their own benefits that they want to keep. But secondly, right, even if because these voices are drowned out, these people will be more subservient, these representatives will be more subservient to these conservative representatives, right? But even if in the case that these progressive, candidates, these representatives will be will actively voice out the progressive policies that they want, these policies will very likely be killed out. What they tried to tell you was that 20% is enough to leverage like a majority, right? But the types of policies that they are advocating for don't already have a majority, don't have the pre-existing majority. The types of policies that they are advocating for, like helping the minorities in a certain company, need more than 20%. Secondly, the second observation for their clash, right, for their case, right, they have a very weak comparative, right? Panel, don't be fooled when first affirmative tries to tell you that she is being super comparative. No, she was not comparative. What did they say when they about the comparative about unions and voting and representatives? You literally, panel, the only thing that you have here, the only mechanism that they chose to give was they are at the table. And I quote, they are literally 1 meter apart. Therefore, their voice will be more heard. Okay, I see no mechanism on how their voice is more heard. Therefore, there will accrue good benefits to the workers, and they're at the table. I don't see how this is a proper mechanism. I'll get more into this into my clashes, right? So at the end of the day, what do these strategic observations mean? Firstly, for their benefits to accrue, they need to prove that, one, they will actually get these progressive candidates into the table. And secondly, when they get these progressive candidates into the table, these progressive representatives will actually be able to enact change. We've already proved that this won't happen. 2 questions in my speech, right? Firstly, on their principle, and secondly, on worker rights. Firstly, on their principle, right? Panel, their principle is grossly disingenuous. Their principle is basically a contract because workers are paid money for what they work. Venture capitalists is based on a contract. They have a stake. They can vote in the company's procedures because venture capitalists literally give these companies money on a basis of a contract. What they are trying to suggest is that there's somehow a social contract between workers and these companies. But panel, note, these workers were not coerced to work at these companies. These workers willingly chose to go to these companies. These workers chose to sign the dotted lines. These workers chose to get the salary, and these 2 workers chose to accrue the harms that they potentially might accrue. So therefore, there is no principal claim here. There is absolutely no principal claim here because it's not like analogous of like, a company of like a social contract where I am like suddenly born in Vietnam, therefore I have the right to vote. No, because these workers chose to go to this certain company. They made an informed decision. So they can't really claim any principal claim there. Therefore, I think like all of their substantive about their principle really falls here because it was just on the basis of a contract. It really doesn't make sense. And because they chose to make a big deal out of this, I think that they really lose this debate from the front. Okay, secondly, right, to the more crucial clash on workers' rights. What did they tell you on workers' rights? Firstly, they said, we will get better policies because of 2 mechanisms. Firstly, we are at the table, quote unquote, we are 1 feet apart. And secondly, these problems will be brought up. Firstly, we are 1 meter apart. Okay, firstly, right, I just want to note that the mechanism they said about how they would get better policies because they're more heard, because they're at the table, therefore they're more heard, is better with unions because unions are bigger. Unions have like capacity to organize strikes, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore unions will be like more heard than like 20% of representatives that are like subservient and are sitting at the table. So unions actually do this better. But secondly, right, I'm going to add a new rebuttal here. This is very bad because it legitimizes doing nothing. So even at the point in which you have like representatives from minorities that are voted in at the table, but they can't do anything, this legitimizes doing nothing because what it means is that the conservative like establishment representatives cannot just say, workers were involved. Workers voted these people here. Therefore, we already gave the workers what they need. This is just a very subpar policy to like legitimize the establishment representatives' prior control. And furthermore, we need to understand that unions are very, very established. Unions have more voice. Unions have more people that buy into these unions. So therefore, unions are actually more heard than their mechanism about 1 meter apart. Secondly, they talked about how, unions aren't moderate, therefore people will fear unions. No, I think that unions being like a bit aggressive is what actually leads to the type of changes. They tried to prove to us that unions are bad, but they really didn't compare they didn't really deal with the comparative about how like 20% of people at the table will be able to get like these type of progressive changes. Secondly, what did we tell you on this clash, right? Firstly, we told you this is very bad for companies because of 2 reasons. Firstly, because of the short-termist nature of these types of decisions, right? It's very analogous of a democracy because these people, what Dung told you in his second speech, because these people, because they're voted in, they have to try to galvanize their voter bases. They have to try to appeal to their voter base, and they want to think about re-election because told you in her first speech is that there is a lot of benefits to being a representative in a board of directors. So therefore, they're more likely to try to galvanize their voter bases. They're more likely to think about short-termist policies like immediate relief on wages instead of educating workers, et cetera, et cetera. And secondly, they'll try to galvanize voters, and secondly, because voters, they don't have the bird eye vision about what is good for the company, right? So firstly, this is just worse for the company. But if it's worse for the company, why is it worse for the workers? Because it's trickle-down effects. Because if the company doesn't function at a maximum capacity, if a company doesn't get enough profit, then how can workers try to advocate, try to get better worker rights? These things, also all of the policies that they advocate for, even if we assume but not concede that these representatives will be able to advocate for good policies, they won't have enough money to advocate for these good policies, these better worker rights. Secondly, it's just harder. We told you it's harder to get progressive representatives. Firstly, because there's just much less political capital of a minority candidate, because you need to know people to get a platform. You need money to get a platform. You need to know certain people in the company. Secondly, yeah, you don't have enough money to campaign, and campaigning was the model that they agreed on about how these how to vote these representatives, but they don't have the money to campaign. And thirdly, right, and this is very important, because these minority candidates, because they said that these minority candidates will be voted in, these minority representatives will be voted in because people want to vote based on their minority, on the minority. But because they are minority candidates, their votes will be drowned out by the majority, because coupled with the fact that they don't have enough platform and enough political capital, coupled with the fact that they from the start don't have enough votes, therefore they're very unlikely to be voted in. What's going to happen is that there's going to be very establishment representatives that are voted in. So at the end of the day, we prefer a comparative in which meritocracy makes it easier for these people to get in these positions, and therefore they're more respected in these positions, and therefore they can advocate for more change. So what happens, right? Firstly, we've shown you that they won't get these progressive representatives into the table. And secondly, even if they get these progressive candidates there, they won't be able to do anything. We're very proud to oppose.
Thank you for your speech. I now welcome the reply speech from the negative side to close the case.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me just quickly fetch my timer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Three key strategic observations in today's debate. Firstly, we've proven to you clearly in my speech that they have not rebutted about how as long as we can prove that that we are the team that most ensures the benefits of these companies, then we can still win this debate. But on these practical principle alone. I've told you very clearly in my first speech about how firstly, when companies are more profitable, they're able to actually better cater for workers' benefits, and secondly about how if these companies are able to survive overall, only they're going to reinsure the workers have their benefits. So as long as we can prove, because the workers' rights or benefits are so contingent on the company's benefits, as long as we prove we can get the company's benefit, we can actually prove the workers' benefits also happen on the long side of the house. Secondly, they never really proved to their burdens a burden about how unions can never be reformed and why we have to have this policy in the first place. Because we gave you literally a quadrillion reason to why this policy is so detrimental, and they're not fully able to fully rebut at all. So then we have to prove to us why union reform is so impossible, that we need to opt for this alternative that has so many harms to it, and why that opting is actually worth it. Secondly, on the contradictions, thirdly, on the contradiction on their case, they tell you about how toxic employee-to-employee relations, about how these workers can be bought out. Like our second speaker pointed out to you, all of this also applies on their side of the house with the normal voter base as well. So if they agree with this, that all this toxic employee-to-employee relationships and workers can be bought out, then all of the harms they say we have also happen on their side of the house. They can really get no benefits at all, even marginal benefits. Oh, and lastly, on the last strategic thing that they have, is that they've not been able to prove two things that are crucial to their case. Firstly, on why these people are actually able to these progressive people are actually able to get a seat on the table. When we've proven to you many reasons why they can actually get voted in, because of like money and so forth. And secondly, why if they were to get a table, they can make an effect at all. We've given you so many reasons about how like it's not enough to actually make an effect. But these other factors are much more powerful. But okay, that's enough for strategic observation then. But furthermore than that, we've also convincingly won today's debate on two factors. Firstly, we prove why they cannot get their change. Well, how have we proven this? Firstly, we tell you about how like they cannot get their change because this is such a small minority and they'll be drowned out by the other factors. And my third speaker told you beyond that these people will have tendencies to be subservient to the majority to really like get their point across. They will concede and so forth to really get their power through. And secondly, we've already given to you, like we pointed out, that a lot of the policies in companies require more than like a simple majority to get passed out. Like very crucial policies, like for example, like wage reform and so forth requires more than majority. So that 20% doesn't really mean a lot in the very impactful policies that they're trying to advocate for. Secondly, we tell you about how all the harms of unions are still there, so they really cannot get their change. And also about how, like on their side of the house, the majority will get voted instead of the minority, which will like have problems, make sure these people are not really competent, we've said before, and about how like the minority will not get represented. We'll talk about beyond proving how their side cannot work, we also proven to you how our side, unions, are actually better. Our first week told you about how they have like force, but secondly, we've already told you furthermore that unions are much more established. Like they have laws and so forth that hold them in, and they have current systems where the government actually support and like hold them up. They're much more established and much more powerful and much more legal backing than this new system that's like not implemented yet. So beyond that, it uses actually a better actual role to really help this policy change. Beyond that, I also tell you about how we're better for the company, which is proven to actually benefit the worker. Especially about like how these people are very short-termist and how our side is not short-termist at all. Also about how we have better, the employees outside the house don't have like the proper bird-eye vision to really like get the policy they want across, because they have things like family and other things to prioritize over the benefit of the company. They can cloud their vision overall. So therefore, because outside of the house have because their side of the house made so many strategic awareness and lost in the debate from the beginning, because we proved how they cannot get their benefits, and lastly, because we proved how our benefits are much better. We're convincingly won this debate and so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the affirmative reply speech to end the case for the affirmative.
Hello, testing my microphone. All good?
Yes, it's working.
Okay. So negative side may make a lot of fun out of being 1 meter apart from other executives, but for a lot of these unions, that is actually more than enough than having to stay out on the streets for weeks without any pay. Note that they still have not comparatively defended their, the alternative or counterfactual at negative. If they concede at what hand you can regulate unions, but somehow on our side, we can't regulate the elections we have or regulate the different process that allow us to get some negotiating leverage. There are two issues I want to look at in this speech. Number one, how would a co-determination setup look like? And two, what happens if we lose? Firstly, how would a co-determination setup look like? So we asked a very simple question from the beginning of this debate. Why do companies and employees agree to buy into a co-determination setup? Why do I know this? I know this because a lot of unions, as we have successfully demonstrated, are also the ones that clamor for these co-determination policies across different companies as well. We are expanding this network to other companies, and that's why we believe it is good for all companies to adopt it. The misconception of negative was that, no, there are still going to be irreconcilable differences that cannot be done, like short-term versus long-term interest, profit versus self-interest, and therefore it's going to be difficult to reconcile. That exists either way, even if I consider it to exist. But there are two unique facets that we said for that allow them to buy in. One, that employees are able to get a say and get some marginal influence by having direct voting power as opposed to indirect voting power through unions, because even if a union votes for a policy, it still has to be approved by the same amount of individuals. But two, because employers have the ability to think that now if I can satisfy my employees because they are part and are intertwined with my interests, I am able to benefit and profit off this arrangement because I have long-term securities in the form of these unions or in the form of these employees staying in my company, as opposed to me having to fire them off or thinking that they're going to leave my company because they hate me. There are many reasons to believe that this irreconcilable difference is exacerbated in their model and is bad. What was their response? Their response was the same old, same old. 20% is not enough, and it's not going to be difficult. It's going to be like not. It's going to be tokenistic. It's not going to be good for people. 20% is so huge in many companies. Like, just imagine if you had 20% of the stake in Amazon. That is a lot of your representation. Even if you have other people that have 40% or 30%, those interests still have to collide, and you're still gonna need people to buy into other people so that you get other interests. They said that no, you don't have the majority interest, but that's not what we're aiming for. We are aiming for the political capital, the social capital of being able to get some compromises where it is needed. If it was really uncompromising, then they're gonna lose either way. And if they lose in some instances, they can win in others. But at least in the compromises that we can measure, it is better than having zero representation through protests. That's why we win. But the other thing I want to look at is for the representatives that they elect, they're reliant on this characterization that we get corrupt, rich individuals that always want to pander and get money and have like electioneering, for example. But that's just in comparative against their model that they can have union reform. Unions also have elections. Unions also elect leaders. Those also happen on their side too. Why is it comparatively better on their side if they have reform compared to ours? We changed that, but it is worse on their model if you rely on union leadership alone because they're antagonistic against employers, compared to the status quo where workers don't have the fear of being fired off or being taken off or their union being disbanded or being catered away, because all those worst cases are taken away on our side. All these reasons prove that substantially co-determination is simply better, that we're able to safeguard ourselves in the worst cases of co-determination, or at least the worst cases of protest always failing. We give clear draws out and clear compromises that are more likely to succeed. For all this and more, I'm very proud to post.
Thank you for your speech. I now request both the teams to leave the breakout room, and I'll send one of the panelists back once we're done deliberating. Is that fine with you all?
Yep.
Thank you.